There's been a mess on YouTube lately about all this new dieting techniques. Well, the thing is, everyone's wondering, what credibility do you have to give this nutrition information? What diplomas do you have? What certifications do you have? Okay, guys, YouTubers aside, some of the most highly qualified, and I'm talking way beyond your local nutritionist qualifications. I'm talking the most qualified, the most educated people in the fitness industry, namely Alan Aragon being a big one you guys may know, if it fits in your macros, all carbohydrates being the same. There's been books on this since 2005. This information has been out and they're real facts. Obviously my whole channel is just about expanding bodybuilding and I simply share what I do as I learn it. What I am going to talk about is the new mess going around YouTube about all carbohydrates being the same. You've all been asking me what I mean when I say that. And I want to make it very clear that I am practicing what I preach and I'm proving that all this system works. I'm not just learning it and sharing it, I'm also applying it to myself and showing you guys firsthand that it works. This is me only 6 weeks ago at 190 pounds. I was all bloated, I was close to 200 pounds, but good amount of body fat. I dieted down to this after about 4 weeks. And then now I'm down to about 171 pounds 6 or 7 weeks later. And I've been eating everything from cheeseburger clubs. I managed to go out with my girlfriend on her birthday and got pinkberry ice cream with all the toppings. I've been able to have fun and still eat these cheat meal foods without actually being cheat meals, without slowing me down at all. And I've been doing it regularly. Of course, my main diet is quality whole foods, so I'm still nutritionally value. I'm still healthy. I wouldn't be able to do this if carbohydrates weren't all seen as carbohydrates and utilized as such in the body. So I'm going to tackle exactly why carbohydrates are the same today. I'm going to try to keep this nice and short and sweet for you guys. And if you have any more questions, you want me to really get into the details of it, I'll be happy to make another video. But I'm going to cover the 3 major problems people have with carbohydrates. The glycemic index, fast-acting carbs versus slow-acting carbs. The insulin spike, how insulin actually works and how carbs really relate to it. And then, finally, the process of de novo lipogenesis. Carbohydrates storing as fat. I'm going to cover all 3 of these. So the glycemic index, right? The whole system being, if it's a higher glycemic index, it's a faster acting carb. It's going to spike more insulin and it's going to cause fat. If it's a low glycemic index, a low GI, it's a slower absorbing carbohydrate. It's not going to spike as much insulin and it's not going to cause fat. It's a clean carbohydrate, right? Problem is, that's wrong. See, the glycemic index was designed based on a test done in 1981. Now this test was done for people with insulin deficiencies, like diabetics. It was not done for people who can regulate their insulin levels at a healthy rate like most of us can. And to further that, the test was done, again, for insulin response only. It had nothing to do with fat gain or loss. These gimmicky supplement companies, these gimmicky diet plans, they took that whole test and they spun it into the mainstream. They took the idea of the glycemic index and spun it as something to do with fat gain, when it really had no intention of being that way. Anyway, the entire test was really faulty and there's a lot of loose ends to it. See, they took some test subjects, they starved them for 24 hours so their insulin dropped to a natural level, which none of us are ever in a fasted state like that, at least not for 24 hours. And then they fed each one of these people a simple carbohydrate, just a carbohydrate alone, no fats, no proteins. And they fed them each a different type of carb. And then they tested their blood sugar. If that carbohydrate had spiked this person's blood sugar up by 80%, it had a glycemic index of 80. If it only spiked it by 15%, it had a glycemic index of only 15. That's how it works. Problem is, any macronutrient you add with a carbohydrate will slow down and change that absorption rate. So you have sugar, high glycemic carb, fast-acting carbohydrate, right? You add some sort of a fat to that sugar, any sort of fat at all. That fat's going to slow down the digestion of that carbohydrate, and it's actually going to lower the GI of sugar down to the glycemic index of oatmeal. So now that sugar is as slow acting and as insulin spiking and as harmless as oatmeal is, just because you added fat. So literally fast-acting carbs can become slow-acting carbs with every meal. Or slower digesting carbohydrates can actually act faster than these fast-acting carbohydrates if they're simply eaten alone, and the fast-acting carb is eaten with protein or fat. Easy as that. In other words, the glycemic index goes completely out the window as soon as you add it in with a regular meal. Unless you want to recalculate out that glycemic index mathematically based on every gram of protein you added, every gram of fat, and how much of it you have with every single meal, the glycemic index is non-existent. It doesn't make a difference at that point. Alright, so fast-acting versus slow-acting, it's always changing, it doesn't make a difference. What if I wait for a while and I finally have dessert at the end of the day, and then this dessert is just pure sugar, fast-acting carb, nothing else with it? Let's just assume this dessert somehow didn't even have fat in it, right? It's just pure sugar. Isn't that going to jack up my insulin? Because there's nothing else to slow it down, it's going to jack up my insulin and cause fat? The thing you have to remember about insulin, guys, insulin is the elevation of blood sugar. It's what forces nutrients into the cells. So insulin elevation is a good thing. That's why you want insulin elevated, after you're working out, to feed more nutrients into the muscles, etc. The thing you have to remember, though, guys, is different macronutrients will spike insulin alone. In fact, protein has a higher insulin response than carbohydrates do. So if you're going to worry about insulin at all, you don't want to worry about the protein you're taking in before you even have to worry about the carbohydrates. So that takes carbohydrates completely out of this mix anyway. And that aside, guys, remember, our insulin levels, as long as we don't have some sort of deficiency, our body runs on homeostasis, the balance of everything, right down to a cellular level. Our body's going to balance out our insulin levels. It's not going to let it get way too high. It's not going to let it get way too low to any sort of a dangerous point. So a lot of these crazy claims you hear about eating this will spike your insulin, a lot of it's exaggerated. It's not something you have to worry about tremendously. But bottom line, if you're going to worry about insulin, you'd have to worry about something like protein before. And think about this, little fun fact. You can add protein to a carbohydrate. That protein will slow down that carbohydrate, lower its glycemic index, so that carb is harmless. Yet the protein itself will be spiking more insulin. So that kind of flips the entire theory around, huh? The protein just made the carb harmless, but raised your insulin. So finally, that brings us to, what about carbs turning into fat? Doesn't insulin spike turn carbohydrates into fat? Thing was, this idea came from one of the most well-known, famous studies in the world. I wouldn't say the world, but it's one of the most famous studies in this subject, the Princeton study. They did this study, like most studies, using lab rats. The problem was, what they didn't share is that lab rats, that specific mammal, that specific species, their metabolic pathways that allow this process of de novo lipogenesis, that allow carbohydrates to be converted and stored as fat, their metabolic pathways that allow that process are way more active than human beings. They're highly active. For whatever reason, just their nature, their metabolic pathways allow fat storage so much more than humans do. So they did another study using humans where they fed them incredible amounts of carbohydrates, and they found that this metabolic pathway that allows carbs to be stored as fat is almost inactive in humans. It doesn't happen. Our homeostasis will balance that out. Lipogenesis will be raised, the fat storing process will be raised when our blood sugar's up. But then later on, when that blood sugar starts going down after we've stopped eating for a while, lipolysis, the process of breaking down fats, will come back up to meet it and balance it. So we're constantly fighting and balancing it off. That's why we don't gain significant amount of fat from carbohydrates. The only time we will, and this study proved it, the only time that process actually occurred in humans was after several days of way overfeeding them, thousands and thousands of calories daily, a huge caloric surplus. And when that happens, obviously, your blood sugar's always up because you're taking in so many calories, your body's just constantly working on digesting them and absorbing them and breaking them down, that lipogenesis is always peaked. So the fat storing process is always up because there's just so many calories in there. That lipolysis barely gets to come up, it's constantly being overpowered. The bottom line, guys, is it's really a whole lot more simple than a lot of us have been making it out to be, including myself, over the past years of competing. A carbohydrate will be seen and utilized as simply a carbohydrate. It is a form of a kilocalorie that is simply stored and used as energy in the body. It's only when you simply take in too many, you take in a surplus of calories, that you will begin seeing fat storage. It's really as simple as that. If you're counting your calories, if you're maintaining your calories, or if you're cutting on a calorie deficit, the type of carbohydrate you have does not matter. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't say have a free-for-all. It doesn't say don't watch what you eat. It's just saying the type of carbohydrate does not make a difference. It will be utilized just as a carbohydrate. Glycemic index changes with every single meal, so don't pay attention to it. Insulin is spiked by protein more than it's spiked by carbohydrates. So if you're going to worry about insulin at all, which you really don't need to worry about it too much, pay more attention to your protein than you are with your carbohydrates. And as far as carbs turning into fat, as long as you're not exceeding your calories, it's not going to happen in any sort of way. They'll just be utilized as muscle glycogen and used as energy. So that's really it, guys. It's as simple as that. If you have any questions, definitely jump on the Nick Wright Bodybuilding page on Facebook and ask. If you guys want to hear more in-depth details about all of this, I will certainly make a video, but it'll just be a lot longer and much more talkative. Anyway, guys, I'll keep plugging away. I'll keep sharing my update. I hope you guys do the same. Share your progress on my page. I love all of you, and I'll see you soon. Subscribe now if you haven't.